Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from UNESCO. Welcome to this, the fourth online workshop on the transformative power of ESD for the world beyond COVID-19, ESD and Global Health, recognizing the interlinkage of the health of people and the planet. My name is Joanna Herrett, Senior Programme Officer for Education at UNESCO Section for Health and Education, and I'm very pleased to be here to moderate today's discussion. First of all, I would like to invite Vibeke Jensen, the Director of the Division for Peace and Sustainable Development at UNESCO, to give some opening remarks. Vibeke.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you to this fourth edition of the UNESCO series of online workshops on the transformative power of education for sustainable development. These monthly online events invite stakeholders from the education and sustainability communities to discuss the kind of world we want to live in beyond COVID-19 and what is needed to build back better. In particular, we want to look at how the power of education for sustainable development can be harnessed to facilitate the transformation required for a more sustainable world. As you are aware, UNESCO is the lead agency for education for sustainable development, and through ESD, we are promoting the knowledge, the skills, the values, and attitudes that empower people to contribute to sustainable development as spelled out in SDG 4.7. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought questions around health on the global agenda, and the discussions around sustainable development. And through the pandemic, more people now understand how climate change, extreme weather conditions, or the loss of biodiversity threaten the health and well-being of people all over the world. For example, destroying the forest increased the risk for the emergence of zoonotic diseases, which are diseases that transfer from wild animals onto human beings. COVID-19 or Ebola are infamous examples of this. Besides infectious diseases, many other interlinkages between physical and mental health can be observed. Pollution or nutrition, stress through forced climate migration, just to name a few examples, which we'll explore further during the online workshop today. The health of people and the planet are strongly interlinked, but so far this has not been addressed much in connection with the ESD discourses. And we want to take this opportunity to explore the field further, learn from experts, and understand new perspectives. Therefore, this month's webinar is particularly dedicated to exploring two questions. Number one, what are the interlinkages between the health of the planet and the people? And the second one, how can ESD contribute to strengthen the awareness that protecting the planet's health affects humans' health? I wish to thank you all for joining this workshop, and I hope that the discussions will inspire your work for years to come, and also that you look at integrating the discussions around planetary health into your ESD practices. In ending, I'd like to thank very much the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, and also the German Commission for UNESCO for their partnership and continuous support and good collaboration. In particular, we are organizing the ESD World Conference together, which is now scheduled for May 2021, and also in the organization of this series of online workshops. Thank you, and I hope you'll enjoy the conversation today. Back to you, Jo.
Thank you so much, Vibeke, for these welcoming remarks. And just as a reminder, and as Vibeke has mentioned, today's topic is ESD and global health. And I, for one, am particularly excited by the lineup of speakers that we'll be hearing from today. But before we begin, I would just like to let you know that today we're going to be using a tool called Slido to allow you all to pose your questions, and for us as the organizers to be able to pose those questions to the panelists we have 2 sessions for questions and answers in today's workshop. So I would invite you to please take your phone or on your computer browser, please open slido.com, and using the code, which is hashtag 65497, all the information is on the screen, you'll be able to access. With this function, you'll be able to ask your own questions, but you can also vote other people's questions up or give them a like. And that means that we'll be able to see which questions seem to be the most important to the participants today. So we'll be asking panelists the most relevant questions later, and please feel free to post your questions as the panelists are speaking and as the webinar is underway. So without further ado, I want to let you know that today we'll be having 2 rounds of panel interventions, each followed by those question and answer sessions. While the whole session will aim to address the 2 questions that were mentioned by Vibeke, the first round will place more emphasis on the question of interlinkages between the health of the planet and the health of people. And the second round will focus more on the role of education for sustainable development. So let's now dive into the first round. And I really have the great pleasure here of introducing 2 wonderful panelists who will be sharing their thoughts on the interlinkages between the health of the planet and the health of people, as well as on the role of ESD. First, we'll be hearing from Mr. David Nabarro, who, as many of you will know, is the Special Envoy of the World Health Organization on COVID-19. He's the Professor of Global Health at Imperial College London, as well as a civil servant and diplomat. He directs the Leadership Mentoring Organization for SD, the Skills, Systems, and Synergies for Sustainable Development. He served as a special advisor to the UN Secretary General on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Climate Change, and has broad expertise at the intersection between climate change and public health. Welcome. Secondly, we will be hearing from Ms. Jenny Miller, who is the Executive Director at the Global Climate and Health Alliance. Jenny Miller joined the Global Climate and Health Alliance in October 2016 and leads the work of the Alliance, implementing its strategic direction and working to bring the collective voice of the health community to advance action to address the climate crisis. In this role, she also co-chairs the WHO Civil Society Working Group on Climate and Health. In addition to her role at the Alliance, Dr. Miller currently serves as chair of the Environment section of the American Public Health Association. David and Jenny, we really thank you very much for joining us today. Firstly, I'd like to put a question to David, and we're very pleased to have you with us. And we do know that you will have to leave us after 30 minutes. We know you're very much in demand, but we welcome you for this first 30 minutes of this session. So to kick off today's online workshop, I'd like to invite you to share some keynote remarks on the interlinkages between the health of people and planet, also from your very particular perspective as the Special Envoy on COVID-19. David, over to you.
Thank you, Joanna. I'm trying to find out whether Jenny Miller is in the US or is in Europe. If you're in the US, goodness me, it's early in the morning. Thank you for being with us and for the work you do. I'd like to go straight in to the question. All living systems are interconnected and interdependent. This refers to the ecosystems in our society. It refers to human systems for education or for food or for employment. It refers to all the systems involved in sustainable development. It's this interconnection of living systems that is key when it comes to thinking about human health and planetary well-being. It's this interdependence that really is important, because if one system stops working well, then other systems will be adversely affected. So the good functioning of any one system is key to others. We saw this with bird flu, an influenza that affects poultry and wild birds, that if the level of bird flu builds up in poultry populations, then there's a likelihood of spillover from poultry into humans. And between 2005 and 2010, there were numerous instances of spillover of serious bird flu from birds to the human population. Now, COVID is really revealing interconnections in an extraordinary way. We're seeing the importance of what happens in animals affecting the human population. That's what we call zoonotic disease. We're seeing inequalities once human health is adversely affected in our employment and in our economic systems. We are understanding the importance of humanity working as one in dealing with the pandemic. Basically, we are learning that unless living systems are addressed as integrated and interconnected, we will not be able to collectively work for a world that is healthy for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. A very clear call for the understanding there of the interconnections. For us, obviously, at UNESCO, we're a lead agency for education in particular. So I'm interested to hear from you your perspectives on what role can education play, and particularly this notion of education for sustainable development.
When the Sustainable Development Agenda was developed and then released in 2015, there were 5 principles that came across very strongly. Firstly, this is a people-centered agenda. And secondly, it's universal. It applies to everybody. Thirdly, as we've just discussed, there is interconnection between the different goals in that agenda. Fourthly, you can only achieve these goals through partnering. And fifthly, when you are partnering, it's really important to integrate all the different elements of support to people. The only way to help people come to terms with this Sustainable Development Agenda is through the combination of enabling them to share their experience and enable them to learn from what others are finding. Helping people learn is of critical importance, and that is why this work you're doing on education for sustainable development is key. But there's one little challenge, and that is, as we've just discussed, sustainable development is about interconnected systems that affect people. Much of the learning that we do in schools and universities is still very linear. It's based on simple cause and effect models, whereas when it comes to the functioning of life and promoting health and well-being, it's the interaction between systems that is key. Can our education processes help people everywhere to become comfortable as systems thinkers and systems leaders? I think they can, but they're going to need constant attention to make sure that they help people do one very important thing, which is to hold competing perspectives simultaneously without needing constantly to demonstrate that their own perspective is superior to others. We all have a view on how systems work. We all need to give each other the space to bring our views to the table, because simply to be fighting all the time over whose view is right, whose view should dominate, just leads to constant discomfort and sometimes, I fear, to unnecessary conflict. So thank you for the chance to share. I'm such a strong believer in increasing access to the learning that helps people cope with a systems approach to sustainable development.
Thank you so much, David. Some really inspiring thoughts there about what the future of education could look like if we can embrace complexity and systems thinking. Turning over to you now, Jenny. You are the lead of the Global Climate and Health Alliance, working directly at the intersections of climate and human health. What do you think really are the key realizations for the sustainability communities to understand these strong interlinkages better? Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. To sort of pick up and expand a little bit on David's remarks, I think the most important thing to realize that many people outside of health, and actually many people inside of health, don't understand is that health depends on much more than just healthcare. Of course, access to healthcare is vitally important, but healthcare itself accounts for about a third or less of health outcomes, and the rest depends on socioeconomic and environmental factors like clean air, clean water, education, economic stability, community conditions, and of course, a stable climate and a healthy planet. So once you understand that, then you have to ask the question, well, who needs to be involved in addressing this? And it kind of goes both ways. I think on the side of the health community needs to recognize that those factors, those external environmental, economic, et cetera, factors are a significant part of what affects the health of the patients that are walking into their clinic or hospital, or the community, in the case of public health, the communities that they're serving. And in terms of really being prepared for the world that we are now inhabiting, health professionals and public health professionals need to become versed in the changing planetary conditions. And there are initiatives underway to push for inclusion of climate change and planetary health issues in the medical school curriculum and nursing curricula, in public health curricula. But then conversely, because all of these external factors affect health, those factors are really determined much more by stakeholders and actors in other sectors. And so we need transportation professionals, we need urban designers, we need energy experts, we need financial experts, all to recognize that the work they do is public health work, and the decisions they make and the policies they implement are going to have significant impacts on people's health.
Fantastic points, Jenny, and really highlights to someone coming from a health background in particular, how we need to understand so much more about our environment and these structural determinants. Would you please be able to give us an example then of how considering these interlinkages could translate into some really tangible practice and policies?
Absolutely. So just to take one example, there are many. If you design a transportation system with both health and sustainability in mind, if you're designing with sustainability in mind, you might really emphasize zero emission electric vehicles, that sort of thing, automobiles that don't emit pollution. But if you're thinking about it from a health perspective as well, and really integrating both of those factors into your solutions, active transportation from walking and biking, as well as good public transit, can have a tremendous health benefit from just the physical activity that people would get from their day-to-day lives getting where they need to go. And that in turn has a powerful beneficial effect on reducing heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, a whole host of factors, depression. And for this to work best, you need to think about designing your city in a way that enables those places that people need to go for their lives, their work, their school, the shops, medical facilities, in a way that connects them well and puts them in close enough proximity that it's realistic for people to get themselves there via public transit and walking and biking. And you need infrastructure that makes walking and biking safe. Once you start to design your city for people instead of for cars, this opens up the potential to, create more space for green space, more nature within your cities. And that in turn also has really powerful health benefits. So you create a more livable city, you create a more equitable city by approaching the problem of transportation in an integrated way that really thinks about health and sustainability at the same time. And the benefits can be really, really immense. Just to kind of give a sense of the scale of this, if we did what we needed to do to mitigate climate change to the 1.5 degree centigrade target, the benefits from reduced air pollution alone on health, the health benefits from reduced air pollution alone would more than pay for the cost of that mitigation. So it really is, there's a powerful opportunity for a win-win with integrating these two issues.
Certainly sounds like a very persuasive argument that we need to be making more then in the public domain. Thank you so much, both David and Jenny, for these fantastic opening remarks. We've already got a couple of questions, so you're both still here with us, and I'm going to pose one question that's been particularly popular on the Slido app. It's for you, David. And anonymous poster would like to know, how can we use this momentum around COVID to highlight that the interlinkages between all of the SDGs and reach better commitment and action for sustainable development?
See, this is such a beautiful question because it goes to the very heart of what we as individuals who are working for interconnection really stand for in our lives. Look at me. I'm a medical doctor. I've had extensive specialist training in community health in developing countries and in aspects of reproductive health. And then I have undergone further specialist training to make myself suitably qualified for calling myself a public health specialist. Taken probably 10 years. And yet, what are the skills that I need to work in an interconnected way across the Sustainable Development Goals? Actually, it's the reverse of what I've got. I'm super specialist in a fairly precise and limited aspect of public health. But I've not been taught about housing. I've not been taught about water and sanitation. I've had to learn about climate change through my professional responsibilities. And yes, I'm doing it and I've gone on courses and so on, but I was not originally trained as somebody who has knowledge across the different interconnected areas. I was trained as somebody who has super specialist knowledge in one particular part of public health. I think we've learned so much in the last 10 months. Certainly, I've been working on COVID as a special envoy since the end of January. I've also been working on other infectious diseases that cause outbreaks, and some of them cause pandemics. But I've seen during this last 10 months more signs of people working together across specialties in an interdisciplinary way, finding an opportunity to link arms, link brains, link hearts, and work as one like I've never seen before. Just look at the extraordinary cooperation, not just on vaccines, but also on understanding that COVID is a disease of inequity that really hurts poor people very badly. Just look at the quality of cooperation we've had on understanding which preventive measures work best. We've still got a lot more to do. A lot more cooperation is needed, but we're learning the power of interdisciplinary and interagency cooperation, and I see it being applied much more widely than ever before. So I'm optimistic that what we're learning through COVID will empower us to deal with other existential challenges, including climate and the destruction of nature.
Thank you, David, and I hope that we can all share that optimism and bring it to our daily efforts. There is another question that's been asked by one of the audience members today, Julie, and many people are interested to hear the answer to this. So Jenny, I'm going to pose this question to you. How come the links between human health and the health of the planet seems so very clear and obvious for people, but seem to be ignored by governments?
The million-dollar question. You know, I think some of it is a matter of having the right people in the room. You know, David was talking about the level of training to kind of master different disciplines, and kind of having education that broadens our awareness of the different disciplines required is really important. And we're not all going to master all of them. And so that collaboration he was speaking of is really important. But I think governments, you know, just like the rest of us, often work in silos. We don't have our environment ministries and our health ministries both working together on these issues. And without bringing those other perspectives actually around the table, without bringing health to the table, it can be very difficult for others that are trained in other ways and come from different backgrounds to recognize the importance of it. I think one of the things that COVID has really done in a powerful and very, you know, painful way is to elevate for everyone just how important health is and how profoundly it affects everything, our economies, our ability to have access to the goods and services that we need, equity, housing, you know, many things have been impacted by this pandemic. But you know, getting people around the table that have different expertise that can bring those different perspectives, including the health perspective, I think is really vital to shift government thinking on these issues.
Well, you've managed to answer the $64 million question, Jenny. It's true. We definitely need to be able to find language to speak across the different sectors that we have. I'm unfortunately not going to be able to take another question, but I do encourage colleagues to look at the Slido website, because there are some very interesting questions being asked, particularly around this notion of how education can begin to help learners to become critical thinkers. And as you said, David, to hold these competing perspectives simultaneously. And I think that's really the challenge that we as educators are setting ourselves up for now, to see what these 21st century transformative skills are. Would you like to come in, David, on that?
Well, I'll just thank you, Jo. And it's about meeting people where they are. It's about feeling into the systems as they see them, rather than all the time imposing our own systems definition. It's about recognizing that systems are adapted to different environments. And fundamentally, this last point, it's about being able to see the big picture as well as the small detailed at the same time. I'm learning so much about the power of this form of human-centered systems leadership. And I believe that all of you working on ESD are teaching us such a lot. Thank you for the chance to be here.
Well, with that, thank you so much, David, and also to Jenny. David, I would like to just officially thank you from UNESCO for joining us today. I'm aware that you have another engagement and will need to leave us now, but we very much appreciate your contributions today, and we'll be taking those questions and that spirit of optimism with us. Jenny, I hope that you will be able to stay with us for the next half hour, and you'll join the question and answer at the end. Please feel free to keep your camera on or turn it off now if you'd like, as we move into the next part of our session today. So we've looked at the big picture and the interlinkages between the health of people and the planet. And now we're going to move into the second part of today's workshop, where we're going to dive deeper into some specific themes and some practices. I really have a great pleasure in introducing three speakers to you now, with whom we'll be looking at food and nutrition, pollution, and the question of mental health and well-being. Our first speaker, who I would like to welcome, is Mr. Zitouni Ul-Dada, and he's the Deputy Director at the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Dr. Ul-Dada is based in Rome, but before joining the FAO, he worked at the head of technology unit at UNEP in Paris, as well as at the British government for 15 years, holding various senior positions at the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and also for the French government on international climate change during France's presidency of the European Union in 2008. After Mr. Zitouni Ul-Dada, we'll be hearing from Ms. Bharti Mishra, who's a former teacher at the Shikshiyan School in Gurgaon, India. Bharti Mishra has served for more than 30 years as a biology teacher in a number of schools. As an environmental activist, witnessing growing pollution in New Delhi, India, she's led action-oriented ESD programs, not only to raise awareness, but also to encourage her students to become change agents in the community, in close collaboration with the Energy and Resource Institute in India. Her hobbies are gardening, cooking, listening to music, and reading. And finally, we'll be hearing from Mr. Shane O'Connor, who's the education lead at Life University. Shane leads the Compassionate Integrity Training Education Initiative and coordinates the Global Education Network, which aims to connect educators and those passionate about education and non-formal education centres and institutions around the globe, and offers to support and integrate this compassionate integrity training, or CIT. Shane's also a qualified yoga teacher, a personal trainer, a natural movement specialist, and outdoor pursuits instructor, all passions which he endeavours to incorporate into his work. So I think you'll agree that we have three wonderful speakers with us. And so thank you very much to Zitouni, Bharti, and Shane for joining us. Firstly, Zitouni, I'm going to turn to you as the Deputy Director at the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN and as an expert in climate change. So in your view, could you briefly tell us what you see as the interlinkages between the health of the planet and people, particularly as they relate to food systems?
Thank you, Joanna, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for this important webinar. There are clearly interlinkages, and let me start with one approach that we call the One Health approach. which is aimed exactly at looking at the connection between the health of the environment, the health of animals, and the health of humans. And this initiative is led by FAO and the World Health Organization, but also the World Organization that leads on animal health. And it looks at the health threats and the animal human ecosystem interface and provide guidance on how to reduce these risks. But at the moment, we're putting so much pressure on the environment, so much pressure on natural resources, and the food system depend crucially on the availability of natural resources, obviously land and soil, and also the marine and the terrestrial biodiversity, as well as water and nutrients. And unfortunately, half of the world habitable land is used for agriculture. Agriculture uses about 70% of the global freshwater withdrawals, and also 95% of the world marine production originates from coastal ecosystems. And the food systems and food production in particular are also major drivers, as most people know, of a number of environmental impacts. Almost 1/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the food systems. And that's also, the food system accounts for about 33% of degraded soils and 60% of the global terrestrial biodiversity loss. So the health of the planet, the health of the environment is so dependent on the choices that we make and how we grow, how we distribute, how we produce, and how we consume food. And this pressure that we have on the environment is expected to increase significantly, obviously, with the expected increase in world population and the increase in demand for food production, and also the dietary shifts in our consumption. So by 2050, we expect about 40% of the world population will be living in severely water-stressed river basins, and also greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture are expected to increase from the current rate of around 26% to 30%. So food systems are directly linked to many aspects of human health, and the picture is very bleak today, because we have on one hand almost 800 million people who are hungry, but on the other hand we have around 2 billion people who are either obese or overweight. So you can see the health impact there in terms of food security. And the COVID-19 pandemic obviously is adding further challenges to our health. And we expect that the pandemic will bring around 83 to 132 million people, additional to the figure that I mentioned. And I just want to finish with one important issue that is also related to the health of the planet and the health of people. And that's the issue of food loss and waste. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I mentioned that 800 million people go hungry and 2 billion people have too much food to eat, we also waste 1/3 of the food that is produced for human consumption. And with that, as you can imagine, it goes also the land that is used to produce that, the nutrient, the energy, the water, the efforts from farmers and other people involved in the production and distribution of food. And that 1/3 of the food being lost, if you look specifically at other items like fruits and vegetables, we're talking about 40 to 50%, and also 20% of the meat and dairy, and 35% of fish. So there is so much that we need to do to look at the balance between the use of natural resources and the health impact of that on our health as a human being, but also the health of our planet.
Absolutely. I may just come in there, because I think what you've shared with us here are some really quite dramatic and shocking facts, and I know some of them are certainly new to me, and it illustrates definitely a shift towards more sustainability. And I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I think you've shared so much with us. I think I would really love to hear from you if you're able to, if you were to put your finger on one or two key messages that you would make about what can we do from the perspective of education for sustainable development, with this emphasis on climate change and production and consumption? What would the two key things be that you would say to us that education could be doing better or more of to address these issues?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand the fact that our choices matter. So wherever we educate people, either young or adult people, we need to understand that the choice we make, our attitudes toward food and the use of resources, natural resources in general, they do matter, because they do have an impact on the environment and our health. So we have to understand, where do we purchase our food from, and what quality, what nutritional quality the food we choose has. And that's extremely important. So we have to pay particular attention to our attitudes towards food and towards the planet. And the other thing I would say in terms of education also is we do have to really tailor the education and the messaging, because obviously around the world we have people with different beliefs, with different cultures, with different circumstances. So, the educational curricula or even the messaging has to be tailored really to these principles, to make sure that people understand the seriousness of the issue, and also connect with these messages. So I think we have to be very sensitive to tailoring the message, not to think that we can have just one set of education curriculum that can serve everyone.
Thank you so much. I think those are excellent thoughts for us to take with us as we continue to work towards a more relevant education that can help young people and adults shift to more sustainable patterns. I'd like to move now to our next speaker, who's Ms. Bharti Mishra, who's going to take us to Delhi, New Delhi in India, where she's working as a science teacher. Bharti, we'd love to hear from you a little bit more about your daily life as a teacher in New Delhi, India, and how you've been dealing with these interlinkages between the health of the people and the health of the planet. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Joanna. Namaste. And it's my honor and pleasure to share my thoughts and view on a topic which is very close to my heart. The state of affairs of the environment today is deplorable, and we are responsible for it. We have destroyed the environment over generations. Now, the connection between planet health and people health, in connection to my country, India, we are diverse, secular, with a rich heritage and culture. But we are overpopulated, and most of our problems begin there. Given an example of our religion and our festivals like Diwali, where it's marked by burning crackers, or Durga Puja or Ganesh Utsav, where we immerse idols in rivers. Now, living in harmony in a secular nation is a big challenge. And religious sentiments play a very important role, and which does not allow us to deal with environment pollution. Now, for example, when we are burning crackers, as the winter sets in Delhi area or North India, because of burning of agricultural waste by farmers, release a lot of toxic smokes in the air, and with the falling of temperature, a haze and a smog is all over North India. And at that time only we have Diwali, where we also burn crackers, So it releases toxic particulate matter in the air, and which when inhaled causes a lot of respiratory problems. And the common thing which a small child is able to feel is heaviness headache, irritation of throat, nose, and older people have a lot of breathing problem. The other thing is immersing your idols in the rivers. Now you know that when you immerse, what are we releasing in the water? We are releasing oil, we are releasing toxic chemicals, heavy metals like mercury. There's also cadmium, arsenic. Now, all of them are indirectly creating havoc in the water ecosystem. Now, when these water from the rivers reach the ocean or the sea, they are slowly killing the aquatic life, and they're also leading to biomagnification. And one example which in school we teach is about the DDT. Now, DDT reaching the fishes and the seagulls have led to the reduction in the number of birds in the southern hemisphere of our world. So we people are indirectly responsible for all activity. And then in our country, there's a great divide between the rich and the poor. Now for a living, emissions released by farmers or by industrialists with their fleet of cars. Now these all are simple problems which we are facing and which indirectly are harming the environment, the planet, and the result is it is also causing diseases. Now, if we are using water which is contaminated, it can lead to a lot of disease, The simple which for a small child is, if it is a contaminated water, diarrhea, then waterborne disease like typhoid. So, or it can be a breeding ground for microbes. So they are all interlinked and they have to realize we have to mend our ways. Then only if the climate is clean, we can live safe.
This is, Bharti, I can hear your passion, and there's such a range of different challenges that are planetary, environmental, and as you say, caused by humans. We can see some wonderful pictures on the screen of, I think they're your students in some of the projects that you work with. Could you very briefly just tell us what the projects were that these students, what they were doing? And because for us, it's so exciting to hear that you've been able to sustain this activism over such a long period of time. So what were the students doing here, and what may they be able to continue to do to address these problems? In just 2 minutes.
Okay, my first picture is the one when for working for 5 years in a project Search by Terry and Tetra Pak. Our school was the collector of highest recyclable waste, And then we were felicitated by R.K. Pachori, Robert Son, and Kandar Singh, and my children and my school for collecting waste and sending them for proper recycling process. And the other pictures were about the door-to-door campaign, because if you do, if you hold rallies once in a while, people forget. But if you every week, every day, knock at the door and say, let's have these simple practices, let's save water, let's use cloth bags, stop plastic bag, and segregate your waste into dry and wet. It slowly helps to save the planet. And then here there is creating sustainable lifestyle. I visited a lot of government schools, making these children realize that simple practices like switching off the light, or like using the bicycle instead of, or carpooling, will in long run help to have a sustainable lifestyle. And the other one was before Diwali, and also making people realize how much harm plastic bags are creating. So why not carry cloth bag from home when you're going shopping or doing things? Or do not burn crackers, not only in Diwali, but when you are having wedding or any festival, so that their action does not lead to harm the environment.
These are fantastic examples. And I think what you're showing us here is how the kind of commitment that you're demonstrating as a teacher can help students to engage their communities, to understand that choices do matter. So thank you so much for sharing these examples with us, Bharti. So our last speaker now, before our Q&A session, is Shane O'Connor. Shane, would you be able to share with us just a few sentences about your work and how you think the environment and mental health and well-being are connected. Shane.
Thank you, Joanna, and buenos dias, buenas tardes to everybody. It's lovely to be here and actually act as a student, as a learner, but also to be able to contribute in some way. And so I think David's opening lines at the beginning about recognizing that all living beings are interdependent and interconnected, I think it's a perfect way to start. But what if we're not feeling healthy? What if we're not in a healthy environment? And what if somehow our vision of interconnectedness and interdependence is somehow distorted? What we're working with within myself and my colleagues and organizations that we're working with as well that are doing similar work in the area of social, emotional, and ethical learning. What if we're distorted? What if we're traumatized? What if we're hurt or we're not feeling so grateful and we're not practicing empathy? How do we then go back to this sense of being able to see the world in an interdependent, interconnected way? And so we're sharing toolkits, we're sharing ways and practices to be able to challenge some of the areas that can affect our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. So the CIT, and you can see on the screen in front of you here, there's a package of different skills that we have, from self-cultivation to relating to others, and then where I really connect the education for sustainable development and also the social and emotional well-being that we're talking about here with the environment is looking at systems thinking, looking at appreciating interdependence and engaging with discernment. Is what we're calling, the ability to be able to think, act, and even speak in a way that's compassionate with our actions and with our words and with what we're doing in the communities and in the conversations around us. And so we have a training that's been tried and tested, and it's a combination of, I suppose, it's Western sciences and practices with Eastern philosophies and tried and tested practices over thousands of years. And so it's really working from the self at the beginning, relating to others in the second phase of our training, and then looking at how we can connect to our planet, but also the people within our planet. And I've mentioned the word toolbox and toolkit. For me, as a participant of this training in the first place, I found it really, really beneficial to be able to just go through these different areas, to explore areas of what is resilience, what is it to be in a resilient zone, or if I'm knocked out of my resilience zone, if I'm somehow distorted or I have a thinking trap, what might I be able to use in a very practical sense to be able to get me back into this area of resilience? And the thinking, of course, is that healthy individuals, healthy beings can also provide and work towards a healthy planet that we're living in. So it's building on the scaffolding of these skills and these practices, and seeing them not just as one, standalone silos or a specific skill that we only connect with that skill. We build on these skills and work towards appreciating interdependence and discernment, as I talked about within our final phase. And they are, of course, inextricably linked. I think, a healthy understanding of our actions, words, and thoughts will link ourselves, our beings, and the beings in our planet as well. So to explore interconnectedness, to explore systems, but also analyzing our systems, how we do that in a very practical way, while connecting with other people who are going through the training at the same time. So we are working with our partners in India with the Mahatma Gandhi Institute and UNESCO MGIEP. We're working with other trainings around the world, for example, the social, ethical, emotional learning training. And we're exploring human values, how we maintain our integrity, how we look at our self-cultivation first, and then how we relate to other beings and playing this role in the systems. And then sometimes we deep dive into concepts like compassion. What is compassion? What's the science of compassion? How does it affect our brain and the neuroplasticity? And how are we learning to be more compassionate? Similarly with empathy, resilience, emotional awareness, gratitude, looking at impartiality and common humanity, and also looking at areas of forgiveness and really connecting to all the pro-social skills and tools that we can see, and exploring our physical, emotional, and mental health and well-being, but also looking at how that affects the planet around us. And I think the image here in front of us is very much the ethos that we're looking at within CIT and how we do the work. So it's not expecting us to have perfection. We're really looking at the small increments. We're looking at progress, not perfection. And if we even individually, but really working towards a collective understanding and interdependence, if we alter or change or shift our consciousness in some way through practice, through skills, we talk about meditation or contemplative practice, if we shift it slightly, similar to the image of the boat, if we just turn that compass slightly, we'll end up in a very, very different direction and a different destination at the end of it. And hopefully that is leading to a more healthy planet. And yet this last image that we have here, I've been very fortunate to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama with my work back in Ireland, working for sustainable development and global justice. But it says it clearly: if we want to be healthy, practice compassion, and if we want our planet to be healthy, practice compassion. I think we could probably replace healthy with happy. I think we could replace healthy with joyful, and it has the same strength as well to that. So thanks, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Shane. I think you've really given us a lot to reflect on there. And I think for me, the notions of social, emotional, and ethical learning are something that we talk about an awful lot in health education, and what we're also talking about in education for sustainable development. So already there's a huge area for interlinkage and interconnection, and building on these two apparently separate areas to bring them more closely together. I want to thank all of the speakers for what they've shared. We're running up against time a little bit, and I apologize that maybe I haven't kept the time as well as I should have, but I think we've had some fascinating inputs. I'm going to ask one or two questions that have come up. So the first question that has been raised by some of the audience members on the session today is for you, Dr. Zitouni. And the question is, how can the transformative power of education be better integrated into other hard science policy areas? What's your experience of this from FAO? And you have just 1 minute to try and give a brief reply to this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. Well, obviously the nature of education, as we've been talking about, it has to be cross-cutting. You know, education is not only in one area or for certain people, it's for everyone. I would say, you know, in addition to the education in the area that I mentioned earlier, I think transferring that into other hard science policy areas is absolutely critical. You know, if we want to make sure that, you know, the scientists and the politicians really understand the linkages between the two and the importance of education, particularly in making messages really accessible to people. So in our area, for example, you know, if we want to educate farmers, which we do, we have platforms and initiatives related to that. So you have to make sure that the messages are accessible, they're easy to understand, and they are influential, and also get the farmers to be actors for education between themselves. That's why I mentioned earlier, we have to be sensitive in tailoring, you know, our approach and in asking people to understand the purpose of the messages and education.
Thank you so much. The next question that we've selected from the questions being asked is for Bharti. And the question, the audience members commented that Bharti Mishra shows the importance of educating teachers and investing in teacher education. Can you tell us about support and challenges over time? Bharti, over to you. Bharti, you need to disable. You're on mute. Please put your microphone on.
My passion for saving the environment started when I was in school in 70s, you know, and this was inculcated in me by my grandmother, my mother, and my teachers. And they said, you know, even an animal where they sit, they keep the place clean. So we humans need to keep our environment clean. And that time, my school, Ramjas, we started by cleaning the roads around my school, clean, and planting trees. Now, as I took being a teacher as my occupation and a teacher, I realized, someone who can bring a change in the world are young minds, And as someone has rightly said, catch them young and train them young. And those are our school children. And one pioneer institution for this is TERI, which has been putting in a lot of work with school, not only in Delhi NCR, all over India, conducting workshops where small children it's an opener for their mind to see how they can do their bit in bringing a big change. And that is how different activity related to water conservation, keeping water clean, or it's air pollution, or it's a segregation of waste. We have been doing, with workshops, with rallies, with seminar, talking door to door, one-to-one, making people realize that everyone can become a human chain in saving environment, doing their bit, doing what they can so that we leave a clean earth, a clean nature for the generation which has to come. We don't want our future generation to say, what did the elders do? So we have to mend our ways to keep it clean so that we have a healthy environment, healthy lifestyle, and people living in harmony in all parts of the world.
Thank you. And the very final question that I'm going to pose, we are almost at finishing time. We'll just take another 2 minutes before we'll free you all as audience members to go on about your day. And Jenny, I'd just like to check if Jenny is still online. Great. Do you have a response to this question that's been asked, and many people in the audience are keen to hear about it today, which is what specifically should education systems do to help learners become critical thinkers and hold these competing perspectives simultaneously? If you have a thought on that as the final reflection of the webinar, please go ahead. Thank you.
I think a really key factor in developing critical thinking is to kind of think of education far beyond just skill building and training. We have to give learners the opportunity to kind of think in an open-ended way, engage with complex problems, and bring their creativity to addressing those problems and really grapple with things. So I think, project-based learning that gives learners the opportunity to engage from multiple angles on a challenge, creating real challenges that young learners can make a difference on and have an impact with, engages people's kind of richest part of their intelligence. And I think putting those kinds of challenges before those who are learning creates those opportunities to develop those critical thinking skills. I'm also a strong believer in dialogue amongst learners and the opportunity to learn and grapple with one's peers. So those are some of my thoughts off the top of my head about how we develop those really important critical thinking skills.
Thank you, Jenny. And I think Shane, do you have any reflections on that for the final minute of our webinar today? How do we build those critical and interconnected thinking skills amongst learners? Shane, you're on mute.
Apologies there. I only had a minute and I was muting myself. So yeah, lots of amazing questions in the chat I'd love to get to as well. But really, I think it's about walking the talk. So creating a learning environment where it's not just whether it's formal, non-formal, informal, it's not just the learners that are actually practicing what we're talking about here, but it's the educators, it's the parents, it's the grandparents, it's the holistic way of looking at this. And whether they're the pro-social values that we're talking about, or compassion. A question was, what is compassion? It's the motivation to reduce the suffering of others around us and the environment. But if that's just coming from one way, like that's what we're talking about as a, you know, a message to the students, and we're not practicing that ourselves, I think there's this element of hypocrisy. So it's really bringing it into the whole learning environment and really walking the talk, if we can, that I'm walking the talk as much as we can outside for the compassion of ourselves and the compassion of others around us and the planet.
Thank you so much. So we need to walk the talk, and I think we've heard some excellent examples of that happening. We've heard about how we need to embrace complexity and to think in systems ways. I'd really like to extend great appreciation to all of our speakers today, to David, to Jenny, to Zituni, Bharti, and Shane for all of your inputs. I'd like to thank the translators who've been working to ensure that as many people as possible can understand and participate in today's workshop, and also for all of you participants for your engagement and the wonderful questions. I'm sorry we couldn't reach and answer all of them. So with this, we come to an end to this fourth online workshop on the transformative power of ESD for the world beyond COVID-19, with a focus on global health. We do look forward to seeing you in the next workshop, which, as you can see from the information on the slide, will take place in February. There will be no workshop in January. And the February focus will be on the climate emergency and how to bend the curve for climate change. Registration is available. The link has just been put in the chat. Please do go ahead and register for that workshop. And as usual, the detailed announcement will be shared about 2 weeks before the event on the UNESCO website and in our ESD newsletter. You will be able to find the recording of this workshop in English, French, and German on the UNESCO YouTube channel. Please do feel free to check that and to share it amongst your communities for those who may have not been able to join today. And we'll be sharing a link with all of you who've joined. So with that, I would just like to say thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And I wish you all a good day. Thank you.